Hello everybody and welcome to this video in which I'm going to analyze the game Magnus Carlsen against Veselin Topalov from the 7th round of the Shamkir Gashimov Memorial 2018. So the situation before the game was as follows. Magnus Carlsen was trailing by half a point behind leader Veselin Topalov, who had won so far 2 games, and Carlsen had won only 1 so far, which are also covered in another video against Radoslav Wojtaszek. So let's get to the game. And actually, what's funny, the game is still going on right now, but it seems like it will be concluded soon, and I don't have time to record this video later, so I thought why not just do it and go ahead and see where it takes us. Alright, so before we begin, as always, the comment of the day, and the comment of the day comes by Stubak, and he says, wonderful video, learning from mistakes is always a good tactic, and I really enjoy giving us moments to try and figure out why a certain move is wrong. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Stubak, and I'll try to do so, and in this video I shall as well ask you some questions. So, Carlsen playing with the white piece, and he started off with the English attack, 1c4, knight f6, knight c3, now e5, and this is kind of reversed Sicilian. So to get what I mean, this is the same as if white started with e4 and c5, just the other way around. So white kind of has an extra tempo in the Sicilian. Knight f3, knight c6, e3, and now d5 would be the reverse open Sicilian, but Topalov chose bishop b4, queen c2, and now bishop takes c3, and Carlsen here plays b takes c3. The main move is to take back with the queen, but pawn takes c3, so the white pawn structure is a little bit weakened, but on the other hand white has a better grip on the center as he has more center pawns, or more access to the center. d6, e4. Yes, if white doesn't react, black will be able to push e4 himself, so this is why white goes e4. Castle g3. Now knight e8 is a rare move in this position. This position has been seen many times, and one common maneuver is to go knight d7 here and then bring the knight to c5. The knight is well placed in c5, cannot be pushed away easily, is attacking e4, and then black also has this plan available to go a6 and b5, and he is doing pretty fine here. But Topalov chose knight e8, also a reasonable move. The point behind this move and also knight d7 is to free the f pawn and preparing the advance f5 to open up the f file against the white king. Knight h4 is stopping exactly this advance, stopping f5 at the moment, so black prepares it one more time, going knight e7, supporting f5. Now Carlsen went d3, maybe bishop g2 is a better move, and after f5, d4 the positions become pretty messy. Because after d3, f5, I think here black's completely fine already. He's better developed. White has a slightly inferior pawn structure, and all the moves are easy to play for black. Take, take, take. Bishop is developed. Bishop g2. Now the pawn on b7 is hanging, and black goes c6, also stopping bishop d5 check, also preparing d5, and Carlsen goes h3. It would be natural to castle here, but probably Carlsen didn't like queen d7 with the prospect of exchanging the light squared bishops, and indeed then the light squares around the white king would be left open for the black pieces. So he goes h3, but here also, as we just saw, queen d7 would have been a good move, because now white cannot castle anymore, as the pawn on h3 would be undefended. Maybe Carlsen wanted to go g4, but this is a pretty risky move to make, because you advance your pawns more forward in front of your king, and that means they can more easily be attacked, and black can open up files against the white king, and this looks promising for black. I would definitely prefer the black pieces here. Back to the game. Topalov didn't play queen e7. I'm not sure why. He wanted to bring the knight to better squares. Knight c7, castle, knight e6, and we see the knight made his way from e8 to c5, where he now attacks the pawn on d3. White protects his pawn by playing rook a d1, queen d7. Now This pawn is hanging on h3, which is why white is covering the pawn with the king as well as the bishop. Here Topalov played bishop g6, also a reasonable move. Another move would have been to go rook f6, maybe double on the f-file, but black has many moves available in this position, should be completely fine at this point. Rook d2, rook a e8, bring the rook into the center, queen d1, now b6, another nice stabilizing move covering this knight one more time, rook e1, h6, another useful move to give the king some space in the future. Now Carlsen decides to change the nature of the position and takes on c5. He didn't really have any more moves that could improve his position, so he decides to do this exchange. Now Topalov took with the d-pawn, also b takes c5 was possible, but probably he didn't like queen a4 and white taking over the b-file. But also here, I don't think that black has to fear that much. Anyways, also d takes c5 was fine, rook e3, supporting the pawn on d3 once more and preparing maybe to double on the e-file. Rook e6, king g1, protecting the pawn on f2. Just in case, rook d6. Now black himself pressures the weak pawn on d3. So both sides have a weakness here, one d3 and e5. And the question is, how will this all play out? And now Carlsen made a good move. He played h4. h4 is a good move because in some lines, when this bishop moves, the pawn on h3 could be hanging. So this is why white goes h4, and we see the benefit of that in a moment. Now Topalov makes an inaccuracy. After this move, only one move, his position becomes difficult. He needs to protect the pawn on e5 now by going rook e8, and the position is equal. For example, bishop e4, black just retreats with the bishop, and both sides cannot really make progress because any pawn break, d4, f4, would also have big drawbacks. But Topalov instead decides to put more pressure on the pawn on d3. Rook d8. Now he set up the famous Alekhine cannon, I think it's called, with the rook and the queen in between. I think the Alekhine cannon is actually with the queen even behind the rook, so the queen trading squares with this rook. But in general, nice triple pressure on the d-file. But Carlsen just takes on e5. And now it turns out it's not clear how black should take on d3. Topalov makes the right move here, plays bishop takes d3. Why not take with the rook? What would be the problem here? So this is a little bit more difficult to see, but you can definitely try. Pause the video right now and try to figure it out. Alright, so here's the point and also the benefit of having moved this pawn. White now has this nice tactic available, nice interference move. Bishop d5 check, pawn takes, otherwise black just loses the exchange. And now rook takes d3, bishop takes d3, and rook takes d5, hitting the queen with tempo. So black doesn't have time to save the bishop, and after queen e7, queen takes d3, white is now a pawn up. So this is good for white. That's why Topalov chose to take with the bishop on d3, but now white also has some tactical tricks. Bishop e4, nice move by Carlsen. And here the position is quite tricky for black and Topalov doesn't find the right way. Let me show you first what he did and then we'll see what he could have done better. So he played bishop takes c4, and why was this pretty much a game-losing mistake? So another question, but this one's easier, so try to figure it out. I'm pretty sure you can do it. Alright, let's see it. So this is a classical distraction motive. So rook takes, queen takes. Now the rook protects the queen, and what we want to do here is we want to distract the rook from protecting the queen, because then we could win the queen, right? And that's what happens. Not rook e7, but rook e8 check. And let's get rid of all these arrows. Rook e8 check. And the point is, if the rook takes, then white takes the queen. That's actually what happened. What are black's other options? If he goes king f7, that's the only other reasonable move. Then the problem is that white can take on d8, and the white queen defends the rook on d8, and the rook defends the queen. So white is up a rook. That doesn't work, and white wins material. So let's go back before we continue with the game. What could Topalov have played here to save himself? Well, this threat is very strong, and also the same thing happens after bishop takes e4. Same story, rook takes d6 and rook e8 and white wins. Same story with this distraction motive. So Topalov had to stop this somehow. It's not that easy, but he had to play an awkward move, king f8, to stop exactly this tactic of rook e8, because then in all the variations black could take with the king. And here it seems as if white doesn't have that much, if anything at all. It seems the best try would be queen f3 check, king goes back to g8. Now bishop takes c6. So you might wonder now, why not bishop takes d3 now? But here the difference is that in this position, first this also looks winning, right? Check, and if rook takes, queen takes. But here black can play king h7, and white doesn't have any follow-up, and this is okay for black. So the best try would be to take on c6 here. Queen takes c6, queen takes c6, rook takes c6. And this is a nice little tactic here, rook d5 now, winning back the piece, double attack, and after rook takes d5 we have another double attack as the pawn takes back, it attacks the rook on c6, rook d6, rook takes d3. White is in a rook endgame with a pawn up, but black goes b5, not allowing white to support the pawn with c4, and it seems like black has pretty good drawing chance as he can put pressure on the pawn on d5, and rook endgames in general have a high drawing margin, drawing tendency. But Topalov didn't find king f8, which is of course a difficult move, and he played bishop takes c4 when this played out, as we already saw. Black gets rook and bishop for the queen, but this is not enough in this position as white has still a lot of pawns left, and the only hope for black is to set up a fortress, and due to white's many pawns, this is not possible in this position. Let's see how it continues. White picks up a pawn, black also picks up a pawn, and now Carlsen decides to push his pawns forward. This is really why the position is winning for white, because he has the pawn majority here on the king side. He can push his pawns forward, open up the black king, then the white queen can always work with checks against the black king and give a double attack, for example, check against the king and attack on the rook, or attack on the bishop and win material. King h7, Carlsen goes on, f4, h5, Carlsen still continues, which is fine. But here he made his life more difficult. He played h5. Instead, queen g6 would have been a good move. Now the king has to go to h8, as not to run into f6 after king g8. Also here f6 would be good and winning, but maybe even better is h5. White would play h6 or f6 at some point, and then he has always mating threats against the black king, and black cannot defend this in the long run. So this is a fairly straightforward win. Another good move here would have been to go queen b7, because after h5 black could bring his bishop back on f7. The bishop defends nicely on f7. If you go queen b7 first, then obviously this isn't possible. And here already the win becomes pretty tricky. Carlsen actually had to find queen d7 here, which is not an easy move to make. One point being that after king g8, white has this maneuver, queen d2, rook e5 and queen g5, once again with ideas to open up the black king with h6 or f6 if possible. But Carlsen played bishop queen b7, natural move going after the pawn, but it seems that here after king g8, queen takes a7, Topalov had a surprising chance to hold this game, in fact, after being, really you have to say, completely lost. But here he missed it. Of course it's not easy, but he needs to get rid of these pawns. The problem is though, he needs to get rid of both of them, and he decides to take on h5 immediately. He needs to play rook f1 and then take on f5 of the rook. So for example now king g3, rook takes f5, check, queen e4. It first looks like winning because of this pin, but black can go g6, takes, and yes, white will win this pawn and will also win this pawn, but to me this looks like a fortress. I didn't check it in great detail, but all the pieces are defending themselves, so I don't think this can be broken, honestly. So great chance for Topalov, but he missed it. He took an h5, and now the position is winning once more for Magnus Carlsen. c4, queen d8 check. Now both players had made the time control. King g3, king h7, queen c7, going after the c4 pawn, takes, and now white just pushes the c pawn forward, and eventually black has to give up a piece for the pawn. His only hope is somehow to give the bishop, win this pawn, and then set up a fortress with the rook, because if we can just imagine only the rook and the pawn being left against the white queen, and the rook was on these two squares, then it would be a draw, as white cannot get through. But black is very far from this scenario, so this position is completely winning here, and white only has to exert some carefulness, some care, and then it is winning. Now I need to check where they are, and yes, the game is over. So let's see what the last moves were from here on, because this is the position when I started recording. And yes, Magnus has won his game. So let's see the last few moves. Alright, bishop b5 was played, c6, and now Topalov took. So this was his hope. He wanted to play something like this, even though this is still winning for white, but this would be a little bit trickier. But Carlsen very nicely plays check. Now king g8 and queen takes c6. And the point being now that after rook takes f5, the rook has to go into this pin, and this is just deadly, and black is not able to set up this fortress. This is what I was talking about. If the rook was in f6 or h6 here and the king was not in check, then it would be a draw. But here white can just give a check here and then bring the king closer, will win this pawn on g7, and then win with queen against rook, as this endgame is winning. So let's go back to a game after queen takes c6. Queen takes c6. Topalov didn't take on f5, but he played rook f6. Now Carlsen just gave a check on e8, king h7, king takes g4, rook h6, king f4, but this is now a simple win, as after rook f6, this is the difference now, with the pawn still being alive on f5, that now in this position, after rook h6, Carlsen can queen e6. This is the difference. This is why you need to have this pawn on f5. If the pawn was on h5, it would be a draw. This one, if this pawn was on h5, it would be a draw. With the pawn on f5, here, white can go queen e6. He can cross with his king, get closer, and also the pawn and games are all winning now. For example, rook f6, white can just take, and this is an elementary win. And yeah, probably black doesn't even have a move here. Okay, you can go king h8, but then just the king comes in, and you can never take on e6, as white takes back, of course, with the pawn, and is in time to queen. Not e7 here, because of king f7, but king d6 first, preparing it, king f8, and now king d7, not allowing the black king to get in front of the pawn, and white promotes the pawn and queens. Alright, so final position was after queen e6. Carlsen wins this game and becomes the new leader of the Shamkir tournament 2018. What can we say about the game? Well, the position was for a long time around equal, and then the situation heated up and Topalov made two mistakes in a row. Especially this move, bishop takes c4, when white had this tactic available, winning the queen. Then of course his position was very difficult. What was surprising to me, at least, was that Carlsen let him out at one moment and actually allowed him to set up a fortress. Of course not easy to find, but Carlsen is usually known for not giving the opponent any chances after getting into a winning position, and here he did so. Alright, that's it. Did you see the moves, the winning tactic for Carlsen? Could you find it? Let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you again very soon. Bye bye.